Pool owners beware. Government retrospective legislation could be affecting 100,000 of you. To find out more, the CEO of the Swimming Pool and Spa Association of Victoria, Brendan Watkins, has kindly decided to join us online. A very good morning to you from RPPFM, Brendan.
Good morning.
Brendan Watkins, this is very interesting. Retrospective legislation. What is the government doing and why?
Under the guise of increasing the safety of toddlers around swimming pools, the government's introducing retrospective four-sided barrier legislation, which essentially means the existing 3 or 4 standards that exist will be simplified and it will become one. It is being done as a means to assist safety. However, it's not following the national trends. The national trends around the country used to have mandatory barrier inspections. So to inspect the pool fence every 3 or 4 years, that's what happens in Queensland, New South Wales and Western Australia. And it's proven to work. The retrospective barrier legislation, there's no real evidence that proves it improves safety.
You suggest it simplifies things. It takes the onus away from that inspection then. In the long term, the government would probably argue it's going to cost less. No, I think that's highly unlikely. They have done costings in their regulatory impact statement, very rubbery numbers. I think for a number of pool owners, it will be impossible to comply to the standard that they're wanting everyone to comply with is AS 1926 2007, and it essentially means the barrier needs to exist between the pool and the exit of the house. Backyards are getting smaller. There's more and more courtyards. It's physically impossible in many cases for consumers to comply. There's a significant cost. Invariably, everyone wants glass fences and whatever else it might be around their pool, which would all make sense if the outcome was improved safety. There's no evidence that it's going to do that. The only evidence that exists is Western Australia. In Western Australia, they've had the longest-running mandatory pool barrier inspection program. It's been going since the mid-90s, and they've reduced the drowning rate of toddlers of more than 80%. It's 83% reduction in toddlers since mid-90s. That's the only empirical evidence that exists, and the government has chosen to ignore it. You obviously would have the safety of these toddlers foremost in your mind. I mean, you would be driven by safety around open water in backyards.
Of course. It's the most important guiding principle of the association. There's no point in having pools if they're not safe. Pools are fantastic assets to the human capital of a community, to have a swimming pool for kids to be outside, to exercise. We have issues with diabetes and obesity and whatever else it might be. Pools are fantastic. We just want people doing the right thing. The right thing is, and the only success that's been established in this country, is checking the fence every 3 or 4 years, and the government's choosing to pass up that opportunity.
Get inside the mind then of Mr. Andrews and explain why he would be driven in this way.
Difficult to do. All of the stakeholders concerned with this issue have been lobbying for the same thing, mandatory barrier inspections. We've been beating this drum for 6 or 7 years, but so have Lifesaving Victoria, so have Kids Safe. It's difficult to understand the view of the Andrews government. I know in the other 2 states, in Queensland and New South Wales, who fairly recently have introduced these programs, they've found it to be difficult. And I think politically it's a challenging issue to implement, because the first obstacle they need to clear is to establish a pool register. No one knows where the pools are. So there's a couple of 100,000 of them, but there's no collection of the data. And they've had a great deal of trouble in New South Wales having pool owners, spa owners, voluntarily give their details and entering a register. And they've had this voluntary program, then they waved a stick and threatened fines and found that difficult. There's a shortage of surveyors, and so courses have been established in the other 3 states for people just to inspect swimming pool barriers. But it's been a challenge for the government to get that through. And then they need to establish a program that every 3 or 4 years someone goes out and inspects the barrier and makes sure it's safe. It's a politically challenging issue to implement. I suspect that's why they're not wanting to go down the path that makes sense.
And we've seen this government, it's got a little bit of form, hasn't it? When it gets into a little bit of political strife, it can legislate or adjust legislation. This is retrospective legislation. It probably doesn't give you guys much chance of a fallback or some way of perhaps intervening or changing the government's mind. You are basically going to have to cop this sweet and on the chin, I would suggest.
Well, yeah, look, the law that they're proposing, so there's a regulatory impact statement that's been just launched, and so there's a 60-day period that pool owners and industry and stakeholders have the opportunity to comment and persuade government that there's a better way, so we're very much going to do that. But as it is, what they're proposing is at the 1st of January 2020, all pools and spas have to comply with the current code. The important thing for pool owners or spa owners to be aware of is that anything constructed after the 1st of May 2010 will be compliant. So it's only pools and spas that were built before 1st of May 2010. But potentially there's 100,000, there might be more pools and spas that are using the back door to allow an entrance into the pool or spa area. Essentially what the government's saying is we want a fence between the back door and the pool. And we'd be absolutely in support of that if there was evidence it improved safety outcomes. The only evidence that exists is mandatory barrier inspections. It's a maintenance issue. And pool owners, unfortunately, in many cases, are leaving gates not to return, not to lock, locks fail. It's just a maintenance issue.
I'm a pool owner. I live down here on the Mornington Peninsula. How do I make my feelings felt?
Well, there's a local member. I'd be suggesting that's probably the first port of call, but it's a state government issue, so councils can apply pressure through your local member, but I'd be going as well directly to Daniel Andrews. I'd be emailing, ringing and asking where the evidence is. There isn't evidence.
There'd be a number of issues on Mr. Andrews' plate at the moment, not with. So I think he legislatively would have his hands full at the moment. I would suggest to you, Brendan.
Yeah, well, look, he's suggesting introducing new legislation, which ordinarily industry peak bodies aren't in favour of legislation, but we actually want stronger legislation. We want legislation that says inspect the barriers every 3 or 4 years. It makes sense. If you went out and looked at swimming pools, knocked on 100 doors tomorrow, you'd find the majority of them not being compliant. The only way to make them compliant is go and have a look every 3 or 4 years.
Brendan Watkins, the CEO of SPASA Victoria. Thank you very much indeed for your time, Brendan. We'll be keeping a bit of a watching brief on this one because, as I was saying to you before we came on air, a number of people down here on the Mornington Peninsula do enjoy their backyard pools and spas, and it's almost part of the lifestyle down here. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks very much.
RPPFM across the Mornington Peninsula, 18 minutes to 9. Don't forget, Bob and Judy at 9 o'clock, taking you through until 11 today on RPP.